Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Look, it's an absolute privilege to be standing up here this morning in front of you. What I would just say before I get into my presentation, though, is when you go back over your history or someone else does, what it reaffirms for me is I've never had a bad posting. And I've absolutely loved what I've done, and it's really up to you as an individual, for those of you in uniform and indeed public servants, to make sure that the job you do makes a difference, and therefore you yourself can sit there and say, you know what, that really was fun. Because probably half my postings I didn't ask for. They were given to me by the Army Career Management Organisation, but as I say, in reflection, wouldn't do anything different. So I'm going to talk to you today about what it says on the slide, which is how we're actually going to change the way we acquire and sustain the EO that we bring into the ADF. Now this is really, really important because, as you heard last night, there's a couple of key points that were made that links in. The first one was from Doss, where he made the point that safety is an element of capability. And that's what we always have to remember, is that it is an element of, a critical element of, but fundamentally we are delivering capability for the warfighter. And that doesn't matter whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, it is the person out there on operations that we are here for. There's around about 2,500 of them out there today, as you heard yesterday, and they are doing it for real. And our job is to make sure that if they need to, they can ensure the other guy dies for his country and they come back to their country. So please, every time you wake up, every time you wonder, what is the decision I'm going to make, just keep that in mind. Am I ensuring the other guy is going to die for his country, and ensuring that those Australian troops who are willing to put their life on the line are able to get back to their families? So that's the first point I'd make. The second point I'd make in respect to that goes back to the way I'm going to do the presentation. For those that know me, and was mentioned, I've actually been an instructor for a couple of years, so I default into instructor mode, and I apologise in advance for some people. But what it means is I do use slides because I understand some people hear, some people see. And particularly when you start getting to our age, the more important thing is you need really, really large notes, because there's no way you can read something in your hand. So I'll just get started. So my first challenge for the people in the room, just to check on history, and for some people this may be history, for some people this may be just part of their career. Can anyone tell me what that weapon is? I look at the older people in the room, bouncing bomb. The reason I put it up there, World War II, the concept was identified in April 42. By July 42 they'd tested a concept demonstrator. In November, they actually identified they needed two weapons, because actually, you may not be aware, that was the one designed to destroy dams. Actually designed a smaller one to attack ships. And that changed the requirements in November. By May the following year, that's what they'd done to a dam in Germany. So from this is a good idea to combat effect, 13 months. If you go from when they actually decided to go with this particular design, it was 7 months. 6-7 months. So that's my first challenge for people in the room, is how do we replicate that so that our warfighters out there today, and as I said, there's 2,500 of them, that they have the same type of weapons they need to achieve the effect they need to achieve. Anyone know that weapon? I think heard here, Grand Slam, largest conventional bomb of World War II. The reason I put it up there, the first one was dropped in the New Forest in southern England as a test. 24 hours later, the second one was dropped. It was dropped in Germany. So for the test engineers in the room, that's my challenge to you. Do a test, get the results, turn them around, provide the information back to an operational squadron or ship, and then go on operations 24 hours later. If we're not doing that, then we're not actually achieving what we used to be able to achieve. And yes, I acknowledge the weapons are more complex, that this is clearly just to make a point. Just to show it's not all, back in the Second World War, Moab, mother of all bombs. First one was dropped in Afghanistan in 2017, but actually was designed for the Iraq War. Those who are unaware, 6 weeks from identification of requirement to having the bomb available to drop in Iraq. Wasn't used, but the bottom line was people such as yourselves, and indeed maybe some of the people in this room, because we do have our international colleagues, were able to turn that around and provide a capability to the warfighter in 6 weeks. So that's my challenge for the room, is not to necessarily meet exactly those timelines, but always ask yourself the question, why can't we meet something similar to those? What is it that's preventing us giving the very best weapon to that soldier, that sailor, that airman, that airwoman, to enable them to make sure the other guy dies for his country? So what do? As I just said, I've come back from operations. I'm now back into CASG, which is a fantastic place to be. There is so much going on, as you're about to see, but it's really, really good people. The challenge is for us as the leaders to make sure we're giving them the leadership that they deserve. So we acquire, we integrate, and we sustain munitions. Fairly straightforward. It's pretty easy. I generally get my golf handicap down on a Friday afternoon. About 370 people I've got, APS and military. I also have a whole lot of contractors, and they're both above the line and below the line, and without them we would fail tomorrow. There's no question. They are part of the force, they are part of my team. The budget up there is $5 billion. I can use any number you want. As we all know, within defence, it depends on how you add the money up, but that would be a conservative figure at the moment. Most importantly, and it's part of the reform we're going through and part of what you'll see later, we have 3 systems program officers. So for the international people, that's simply a group of people that are organised together to deliver effect. In my case, I have 1 directly facing Navy, 1 facing Air Force, and 1 facing the Army. And that's critical because that makes sure that we don't forget who we're there for, because they represent those warfighters in the field. They're not the people in the field, but they represent them. And that's part of one of our key structural changes, is to make sure we don't forget that we're there for someone else and make the mistake of thinking we're there simply to show people how smart we are, because that sometimes can be a risk. In the sustainment space, I've got about 1,000 items that we manage. Now that's from installed EO on aircraft, through to 9mm ammunition, through to SM2s on ships, up to AIM-120s on an aircraft. So, a reasonably broad range of equipment that we have an interest in. About 35 of those are guided, and that's in all 3 domains and becoming increasingly so. The 2 bottom points are really interesting. We are unique in that the maintenance of nearly all our weapons is still done in-house, particularly in the maritime space. And so therefore we have our own facilities dotted around the country where we actually do our own maintenance. And the teams do a fantastic job. So if I look at torpedoes as an exemplar for Mark 48 heavyweight torpedo, we maintain them to such a standard that we can put them onto a US submarine if need be. And they maintain them to the same standard so they can put them on my submarines or onto the Navy's submarines. So you think about that, the US trust us to put an explosive device onto one of their most critical platforms. Now that shows what a good job they're doing. We also have at the bottom there 2 government-owned, contractor-operated facilities. Most people here would be aware of at Benalla and Mulwala, have been there in various forms since the Second World War. You've heard, particularly on the first day, about sovereign industry capability. You don't get much more sovereign than that, than when the Defence Department still owns the facility that can produce the weapons that you need in time of war. We are absolutely working hard with our capability manager within CJC's organisation, who you heard from on the first day, to expand that capability so that it's there in time of war. Because that's its purpose, is to support us, provide surety of supply when we do have difficulty getting things from somewhere else in the world. So that's the past, that's kind of where we're at the moment. What I really want to focus on is what we're going towards. So what I've got there is just a list of some of the projects that are coming through, approved by government or a pre-approval from our government, but are certainly planned to occur in all 3 domains. I'm not going to go through the numbers. If you know them, you know them. If you don't, then it really doesn't matter. Defence likes to use numbers like this to make themselves look really smart. The bottom line is it's in all 3 domains. Army, Navy and Air Force are getting major projects for over $20 million odd, delivering new capability to the warfighter. There is no part of our business that's sitting still. There is no team I've got that's sitting back saying, we've done our job, thank goodness we can move on. So we've seen things like the Joint Strike Fighter starting to come in, fantastic capability. The weapons for it are clearly needed as well to make it a true capability. Same with the new ships coming, the Hunter class. It is going to be a really well-informed surveillance ship if it doesn't have weapons on board. Clearly they're critical, and same in the land domain, Land 400 you've heard about. Lots of minor projects as well. And really when you look across the business, and this is just showing the scope of the challenge and the opportunity, it's subsurface, it's surface, it's in the air, it's manned, it's unmanned. it's dismounted troops, and it's vehicles with troops inside them. I'm not aware of anyone else in the ADF. So every person in the ADF is affected by what my team are doing with the support of other people in this room, and that's the importance of what you do on a daily basis. And really, when you summarise it, that's the particular challenge we've got. It's not just one or two items coming into service, it's all of them. And we conservatively say that we are replacing 80% of our inventory or upgrading it in the next 10 to 15 years. It's probably a higher percentage, but 80 is a safe number that everyone's comfortable with. What we're bringing in, though, is in every case more complex. So when you look at guided weapons in particular, we are starting to network everything. It is a network of networks. So we've always had a situation where you've had a sensor, a C2 system, and an effector. Now that might all be on a rifle, and the sensor might be the person with an eyeball. That might be a ship where you've got a missile on the ship with the command and control system and the ship's defending itself. What we're seeing into the future is where all those networks now combine. So the reality might be that the sensor is a platform you don't even know exists. So you're on your ship, you've just got some information from a sensor, which may be a JSF, it may be a man on the ground, it may be another ship, and your platform is simply responding to that. And you don't necessarily even know what you're doing other than launching a weapon, because you don't need to know that a distance away is an enemy threat, you just need to know that someone needs you to create an effect. Equally, your sensor might be talking to someone else's weapon. That creates issues because, of course, now you've got networks between the weapons and the platforms, which means you create potentially a vulnerability, and you'll see how we're addressing that in a moment. But the bottom line is, with all those things happening, we believe we need to change the way we do business. And certainly the last two are ones that are particularly interesting to the capability managers. They want it quicker, but they don't believe they want it for as long. So my favourite weapon is probably Harpoon, primarily because it entered service before I did. The likelihood of a weapon that stays in service for 40 years beyond, basically I don't think anyone believes that will happen, certainly not in the smart space. If for no other reason than obsolescence of the weapon will prevent us doing so. But certainly capability obsolescence will doubly ensure it leaves service quickly. So a bit of business management for those that haven't seen a similar type of slide. This is kind of the challenge we're facing, and frankly it's a challenge everyone in this room is facing in your part of the business. So what it is, it's what's called an S-curve. So the red line there is a representation of what we do now. And any company has this. Whatever you do, or any business has this, whatever you do, you get some benefits up early and then you start to optimise. And there's little things you can do at the end to make it just that little bit better. But they're only giving you 1 or 2%. They're still worth it, but they're only 1 or 2%. So in our case, we're looking at efficiency of capability. So that extra bit of work we're doing in that torpedo maintenance facility or that missile maintenance facility, that's up towards the end, because we've been doing it for a long time. So we're almost as good as it gets. Albeit, I'll talk about some of the benefits or some of the other things we're looking at doing. The critical thing is the blue line, and this is where it's critical for us to change our way of thinking. That's doing business differently. So the analogy for a company, and the most obvious one that comes to mind for most people, is Kodak. Kodak were really, really good at doing wet film. They were the best in the world. No one questioned it. The problem was someone else came along with that other S-curve. In fact, Kodak came along and developed digital film, but someone else came along and exploited it. Kodak didn't realise, that digital film was the future. We have to be able to realise that the here and now is not necessarily the future. And we've got to do that in the one organisation. So we need people within our organisation, within our industry, who understand that we need to be able to do what we're doing today, but there's nothing wrong with concurrently doing something differently for the future, because we just cannot keep trying to exploit the current situation and think that will get all those new weapons in service in the time they're needed. So that's the business 101. Sorry, my apologies. So looking at some of the stuff we're doing, this is within LEOSPO, so land explosive ordnance. As I said, they're looking at 80% of their inventory changing over, conservative figure. We've totally restructured the SPO. So not only have we restructured it to look towards the Army, within the SPO we've actually now have integrated project teams. And they're key because what we want is the engineer sitting next to the logistician, sitting next to the procurement person. So when the procurement person places the order, the requirements are actually something the engineer has been involved in. too often it's very easy to send the order out and then when the item comes in, ask the engineer to somehow qualify it. So that may seem really basic, but it's something that's really getting us some benefits. The second thing we are in the process of doing, and I would encourage the suppliers in the room to engage with us, is how do we change the question? So at the moment, I'll tell you I want 251 bombs and I want them delivered by next July, preferably before the 30th of July because my financial year ends, and I want them to be delivered to a site. That gives you very little opportunity and that gives me a lot of risk. What I want is have the conversation. Maybe I want them all delivered over 2 years because that makes more sense for the factory. Maybe I want them delivered more quickly because you've identified a production gap and you can get them to me more quickly. But it needs to be a conversation because when they all turn up quickly, my friends down in the front row from CJ Logs area immediately say they don't have the facilities for it. So it needs to actually be a conversation. The next step of that, the really exciting step of that, is maybe I don't want them made today. Because if you can deliver the parts into Australia, let's say I'm using those factories I talked about earlier, I don't have to put the explosive content in until I need it. So firstly, it's a lot cheaper to get non-explosive items to Australia. Secondly, I then don't have lifing starting because a metal shell does not have a life on it as long as I keep it dry. So suddenly I've got an opportunity, I don't have to worry about managing its life. The other thing is, if actually I don't want it in the future, it's a lot easier to dispose of. So that's the conversation we need to be having and we're starting to have with suppliers. And for those in the audience, and irrespective of where you sit in the business, I'd ask you to start thinking, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your part of the business? Because if you're not thinking that way, you're going to be on that old S-curve, and at some point that ends. I need you on the new S-curve so you're ready to be there when we need you. The final bit there, just to show that this isn't just good ideas, we have already saved this year $90 million for Army. Now that's $90 million we would have spent on items that in all likelihood we would then subsequently have disposed of sometime in the future having never used them because we'd realised we didn't actually need them at the time that we were buying them. So $90 million, that's the type of opportunity here. That's not money that goes off somewhere into the distance. That's money Army can then spend on the things they do need in the future rather than the things that they thought they needed, they've now realised they don't. And that's that importance too of having that relationship with our capability manager, our services, because they need to come on the ride. Because otherwise they just think we're not buying what they told us to buy. So that's one example where we are still exploiting the current curve and getting that little bit better, noting that that would be applicable to a new business model anyway. The second bit then, which is applicable to a lot of people in the room, is the engineering aspects. The first point I'd make, which sometimes get lost, so it's just repetition, is ultimately it's the capability manager, so the service chief, who holds the risk and sets the risk threshold. And that's important because he or she is responsible for operational risk. So as a pure engineer, I might sit there and say, it's really dangerous to put that bomb on that plane and to launch it. He or she is the one sitting there saying, but if I don't launch it, I will definitely have soldiers on the ground die. So I have to take that risk. Our job is to explain to the service chief what that risk really is. Now, typically we're not going to be doing that in such a dynamic role, but we do it at the strategic level. So we need those skills to be able to say the risk is 10%. It's really great if you can put it in maths, but it might be you can't. You've got to put it in a qualitative way. But that's our job to do. And if we're not doing and providing that advice, then as far as I'm concerned, I'm failing and we're failing as a team. To do that, we're starting to restructure the types of people we have. We're starting to build up our internal competence, bring in SMEs in these areas that we need them to enable us to provide that advice. The other thing is we're looking at our workforce, and once again I'd look to industry to both help us and to be aware of what we're doing. As I said, if I've got a networked bomb, I now need experts who understand what cyber can mean to a networked bomb. I didn't need that when it was a dumb bomb that was coming off the same platform as a sensor. So what does that mean for my weapons in the future? How do I ensure that someone is not going to disrupt that network? So those are the skills I now need to provide that assurance to the chief that he's going to have a bomb that does what he needs or a missile that does what he needs when he needs it to or when she needs it to. And then we're looking at our processes. And the number one up there is challenge the why. Why are we doing it? If it's only because we did it back in World War II, it may still be valid, but let's just check it is. We need to just make sure we're not wasting time doing stuff that we don't need to do because that delays getting into service. Standardisation is a big thing, and I'm really, really heartened to see that we've got UK and US people here. We talk about this a lot, We need to get better at it. You know, if I'm sitting on the battlefield and I'm out of 155 ammunition, I need to be confident I can use that ammunition the Americans might have without any undue risk to my soldiers. Equally, they should know they can use our ammunition without undue risk to their soldiers. And if there is a gap, we need to understand what the gap is and then agree that there's a gap. But that is something that's critical to us. That's important because firstly, when I'm in operations and my own supply chain may have failed for some reason, that gives me an alternate supply chain. The other reason it's important is if I want to get this stuff to market quickly, I want to give it to the soldier, the sailor, the airman. Clearly, if I repeat all the testing, it's going to take a lot longer. If I could trust the testing that's already been done, clearly I can get it into service a lot quicker. And that's what everyone out there who is wearing a uniform on operations wants us to do. Next one, just need to tailor the effort. You know, really obvious, but really easy in a bureaucracy not to do. If there's 20 steps, it's really easy to say, I'll do all 20 steps every time because that's the safest thing. Well, if I've got experts, I've got SMEs, they should know which steps they don't need to follow for particular products. That once again reduces the work for them and more importantly, gets it into service quickly. So we're doing that. But that is a cultural change because it's really easy to say, you gave me 20 steps, guess what, I'll follow all 20 because that's the safe option for me. Not necessarily for the soldier, it's safe for me. The final one is, you know, critical change in the way we look at business. Do we need all the data up front? Because if we do, then clearly we need it all to be created before we can enter into service. If, on the other hand, we actually understand the risks, we can adjust what data we need up front, and it may be because it's safety, but it may also be to ensure the capability is what we thought it was, and then what data we can create through the life of the weapon. As an example, if I have a 10-year life for type, and I know it's 10 years, and the service agrees it's 10 years, do I need to worry about, you know, lifing it beyond 15 years? You know, you may sit there and say, well, tradition is we extend it, but if we're actually smarter at not extending it, and we can bring it into service a lot quicker, and then we can put the effort into buying the new weapon for the 11-year mark. Just some examples of some of the great work that's being done within this particular space. So first thing is that we need to understand what's important. Just some of the finite element analysis that we've been doing, in this case on rocket motors. The top right is a basic bomb. It could be any type really. Australia is a pretty hot country in some parts, as most of you will be aware. The fill in our bombs actually melts in the middle of summer in some areas. Then it gets on a plane, goes up in the air and it freezes. Then it comes down, it melts again if we don't drop it. That's probably something we want to know a lot more about to understand what does that mean for both capability and for safety. So that's an area we're doing a lot of work into because that's where we need to put our effort, not into things that we know because that's why we know them, therefore we want to focus on them, but things that we actually don't know. The one in the middle is one of my favourites, and it just shows some really great work and a direct operational impact, and that's a bomb lug. Anyone in the Air Force will just at this point kind of lower their head slowly. Back in about Vietnam, there was a decision made that bomb lugs would have a life of about 6 flights. As far as we can work out, no particular science other than, the view was, well, surely you'll drop a bomb within 6 sorties over North Vietnam. We've had 6 flights, give or take, pretty much ever since then. The problem is when we started operating in places like Iraq, and we're very conscious of collateral damage, actually bombs were coming back with more than 6 flights on them. What that means is you've got to remove the lug and replace it. Now, once upon the assumption back in the 70s was that wasn't never going to happen, so it wasn't a big issue. The issue for us is you've got to remove it off the aircraft to do that, which delays the ability to turn that aircraft around and get it back into the air. So that might delay its ability to protect someone on the ground. The engineers, with support from industry, have done some really good work in this space. Funny thing, we've now discovered that is pretty well unlifed. We can get 1,000 flights out of it. So suddenly we've created that kind of impact on the operator in the field that they don't have to remove bombs in the middle of summer in the Middle East, because, unless they want to, because of an artificial or a restraint that we'd put on them. So a really good success story from the engineers and the team that did that, and something that I'm certainly very proud of quoting any chance I get. So I mentioned this up earlier. This is all the stuff that's causing us to look at the way we do. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Go back a step. So I've mentioned up earlier the top points, which is everything's changing. This is now the radical step we're taking and where I need assistance from everyone in the room and indeed from your companies. We are looking at the way we maintain. As I said, we do it in-house now. And in some cases, we strip the weapon down to individual parts. Is that the way you do things in the future? I don't think anyone here strips their iPhone down to check it's working. We throw it away, we get a new one. Is that actually the future? Because actually, what we're finding is most of them are becoming obsolescent anyway, so we've got to be smarter. The critical one is the final point though, alternative acquisition strategies. So I've got a team working on this, and what they're looking at is the way we buy, store, maintain, dispose the smartest way to do business? Are there other ways of doing it? And that's because we can't afford to follow that same cycle if we're doing the cycle so much quicker. Because for a start, the money that would be involved would be cost prohibitive. So I encourage everyone in the room who's got different experiences to look at different ways we can do it. Our intent isn't to solve individual projects. Our intent is to create an indication of all different ways we could do it. And then when the projects come along, someone's had that experience for them and they can look and go, right, I understand now, there's 10 different ways I could do this, and I'm now going to work out which makes sense in my case. Because some of them may still be a traditional FMS case because that is the only way that the US government may be willing to give us that weapon at that point in time. That's fine. But these might include things like, can we lease a weapon? Can I only pay for it when I fire it? Can I have a guaranteed buyback from industry? Because that way, when my SM2 Mod X becomes semi-obsolete, I sell it back to the industry, I get the latest mod, they sell it on to someone else who's not that concerned about having the latest weapon. And these may sound, people may smile, there are countries in the world and there are organisations in the world doing this today for EO. So it's not something that has not been done, it's something that we need to look at. And there will be other options that I haven't even thought of. And that's why I need the smart people in the room to help me think of good options. I'll put Simon's name down the bottom on purpose. He's leading on this work. There's an email address there to get hold of him. If you're interested in helping us, please come and talk to him. And there is no doubt each one of these options has operational risk, because the safest thing to do is put it in my own warehouse. But we need to understand that that also has trade-offs. And one of them is we're spending a lot of money up front to put it in a warehouse to potentially dispose of it a number of years later if hopefully we don't have to fire it in anger. So that's the real radical step we're looking at taking, and that's the area we need the most help with, because we only know what we know. And we need people who have other experiences to come forward and say, you know what, this is how we do it in a different space. So that's what I summarised earlier. It is all changing. If you're not appreciating the degree of change, then hopefully the last couple of days and what people are talking about has reinvigorated you to realise it's not the 1970s, not the 1980s, it's not even the 1990s. Things are changing that quickly. The iPhone 11 in your pocket, 12 years ago, you had a BlackBerry. You didn't even have a touch screen. My children immediately touch any screen they see and assume that they can make things bigger, because that's all they know. And that's how quickly the environment is changing. We are developing, but we need help. And the bottom line is that the EO program is absolutely a partnership between ourselves, industry, both in Australia and overseas, our allies, because there are things that they can do that we need to work with them on because it doesn't make sense to do it on our own, and then with our capability managers to make sure that the compass is pointing in the right direction. I'll take questions in the moment. Just before I do, I just want to draw attention to this picture on purpose, because I put it up on purpose. It's not immediate apparent, but what it is, it's a rain shoot in Afghanistan. You can see by the vehicles' uniforms, a mix of people there. I counted when I was there 6 different tins of 556, inverted commas, standard NATO ammunition at the back of the range. That was because every soldier there was told he or she could not fire anyone else's ammunition, because that wasn't safe. Excuse me, that wasn't safe. We are failing if that's the kind of advice we give to our soldiers, sailors and airmen. Because that's easy, that's safe for me to say, just don't use it. What if they need the ammunition to shoot? Perhaps I should tell them it isn't safe because it isn't safe and you're going to kill yourself. In that case, they may choose not to shoot it. But if the only reason that I don't want them to shoot it is that it's less accurate, or it's going to foul the gun, or it's going to wear the barrel a bit more, if I give them that information, then they can understand that if the American throws them a magazine of ammunition, actually they can fire it without actually creating an unsafe situation for themselves. So that's a really basic example of that's where we should be, is giving that kind of assistance and advice, not sitting back saying, well, what's safe for me as an individual is just tell them not to fire it at all. So I just wanted to bring that up just as a final point, because that's the difference of safety. Our job is safety for the users, whether that's industry or our own personnel, It's not safety for our own career. So I'm now more than happy to take questions from the floor if you'd like.
Thanks, Hayden. That was a very interesting presentation. Obviously got a very busy section there. I was particularly interested in your standardisation of certification, something that we in the UK are pushing, and I expect you'll hear more about that. And we've got a Five Eyes meeting tomorrow to discuss other ways we might be able to tackle that. You mentioned early on your presentation that the Mark 48 you share between yourselves and the States. How did you set that up? Did you have to do a competent body assessment or anything like that?
So in that particular case, we're actually part of a program with the US on the Mark 48, and they audit our facility. But in fact, I send people to the US. I've got some going in February next year to audit one of their facilities, so that we have a confidence in process that they know what comes out of the facility is safe and suitable for them to use, and we know similar. And if they, for example, sometimes operate around Australia, let's say on exercise, they will sometimes even send people to operate out of our facility using our equipment to assist, because I don't have the manpower necessarily to do both.
So that's what we would call a competent body assessment. So I'd be very interested to learn what the theme of your audits are and exactly what it is you're looking at.
Yeah, but what I would say is, when it gets to that point, my challenge for everyone in the room is the senior leadership want it tomorrow. So that is the intent. I sat in a room in the US, using kind of Chatham House rules, where the 4-star in the US said to his own staff, "Do not tell me we cannot accept it from Australia just because we didn't pull the lanyard." So that was his direction to his own staff, was please do not use that as your excuse why we can't accept what the Australians are doing. Now, my invitation then to the other nations is, if we're not doing something that you believe we should, we need to understand that, because maybe we want to do it for our own safety reasons or our own confidence in the system reasons. We may not be aware that what you're doing is a really good idea, but equally we want to have that conversation, because if we're not, we're just going to put ourselves out of business. If every time I say I want to bring something in, I then say, yes, you have seen it flying on a US JSF, or you have seen it fired by a British gun or something on a British destroyer or British frigate, but sorry, it's going to take 3 years before I'll let you do it in Australia. It's just going to put me out of business. Any more? All right. Okay, well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good luck with the rest of the day, and certainly for Dos and the rest of the team, thank you very much for the last few days, in particular last night.
Thanks very much, sir. You're loud there. I'll just come around here. I'd like to thank Brigadier Kohl. I believe, I'll just stand out here so you can all see me anyway. I think it's a great bookend to the Keynote series. This brief is actually quite important because it brought a lot of themes together, with a focus on not just acquisition sustainment, but also the integration, interoperability, and also how we can do business better to support our warfighters. The other thing I want to highlight, I guess in my role and on my DG's role within JLC, is how important his organisation and his programs are, because it's the interface between the regulator, the logistics network, also the industry we have out there. So it's an interface between all that, but more importantly, facing the 3 services. So between that organisation, it's a very important role. At the end of the day, to reiterate the point that the Brigadier made, it's about supporting the warfighter in a timely manner, and it has to be effective. So can you put your hands together again for